We all remember the COVID-19 lockdowns, right? But how did we actually get through them? We were all told to find the silver lining, to reframe things positively. But what if that's not the whole story? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating study that uncovered the surprising psychology of how young adults really coped with that unprecedented stress. Okay, here's our game plan. First, we'll frame the lockdown as this huge global social experiment. Then we'll get into two classic ways people cope, reframing versus just bottling things up. After that, we hit the surprising results from the study, explain why context is absolutely everything, and finally, what all this means for coping with any kind of crisis. And to really set the stage, check out this quote from the research paper itself. This wasn't just some long, weird holiday or an inconvenience. For a lot of people, it was a mass trauma experience. And thinking about it that way, well, that changes the whole game when we look at how people coped. So let's start there with this idea of a global experiment. The lockdown created this really unique and, let's be honest, super stressful environment. And it hit young people especially hard. This study we're looking at focused on the very first, very strict lockdown over in Italy. Now think about it. For late adolescents, this was a massive disruption. This is that time in your life that's all about figuring out who you are, building friendships, becoming your own person. And the lockdown just pulled the plug on all of it, forcing them into social isolation at that exact pivotal moment. So, the researchers tracked the experiences of 497 Italian adolescents and young adults, all between the ages of 17 and 24. And they didn't just look at them during the lockdown. They followed up for a month after the restrictions were lifted to really see how their coping strategies played out over time. All right, this brings us to the two big ideas at the heart of this study. The two main ways we all try to manage our emotions when we're under a ton of pressure. So here's the classic thinking, right? On one side, you have the reframer. This is the person who changes how they think about a problem. We're usually told this is the healthier or adaptive way to go. On the other side, you've got the bottler, who just hides how they feel, and that's almost always labeled maladaptive and unhealthy. But as you're about to see, it's not quite that simple. Let's get a little more technical for a second. The reframer strategy, that's officially called cognitive reappraisal. It's basically the mental skill of taking a step back from something stressful and consciously changing how you look at it to, lessen its emotional punch. It's that classic advice, look for the silver lining. And the bottler strategy, that's called expressive suppression. This is when you make a conscious choice not to show what you're feeling on the inside. It's putting on a brave face, keeping that stiff upper lip, and just trying to power through without letting your emotions spill out. Okay, so you would totally expect the reframers to have done way better during lockdown, right? And for the bottlers to have really, really struggled. Well, this is where the study completely flips the script on us. So here's the million-dollar question. Did finding the silver lining actually help people feel better day to day? And did putting on a brave face just make everything worse? Well, the answer is a lot more complex and, frankly, a lot more interesting than you might think. And here it is, the core findings. Let's break this down. First up, cognitive reappraisal, or reframing. Just like you'd expect, it had a big positive impact on helping people find new routines and see the good stuff. But, and this is a big but, look at its effect on the day-to-day discomfort from all the rules. Neutral. It didn't actually make them feel less stressed by the restrictions. Now, for the real shocker, expressive suppression, or bottling it up. Sure, it made it harder to find the positives, but it had a positive impact on discomfort. It actually reduced how much people were bothered by everything. Let me just say that again, because it's pretty wild. The strategy we are always told is unhealthy, bottling up your feelings, was directly linked to feeling less stressed and bothered by the isolation and the rules of lockdown. People who suppressed their emotions actually reported less day-to-day discomfort. How is that even possible? Well, that brings us to the most important part of this whole story, understanding the why. And the answer, it turns out, comes down to one single critical word: context. The researchers argue that we've kind of been looking at this all wrong. There's no such thing as a universally good or bad way to cope. It's not that simple. Their effectiveness depends entirely on the situation you find yourself in. What works in one crisis might be totally the wrong move in another. And that is the absolute key right here. The lockdown was an uncontrollable long-term crisis. You couldn't fix it, you couldn't change the rules. In that specific context,
trying to constantly reframe a situation you have zero control over, well, it can be totally exhausting. The study suggests that for just getting through the day-to-day grind, suppressing those negative emotions might have actually been like a shield. It helped people endure a marathon that they just couldn't quit.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's try and boil this down to some practical lessons for how we think about getting through any tough situation. Okay, here are the big takeaways. First, reframing, finding that silver lining. It's great for personal growth and finding meaning, but it might not be the best tool for cutting down on immediate, day-to-day stress. Second, those so-called unhealthy strategies like suppression, well, they can actually be pretty useful in a short-term, uncontrollable crisis. And that leads to the biggest point of all. True resilience isn't about always being positive. It's about having a flexible toolkit of strategies and knowing which one to pull out at the right time. And the deciding factor? It's whether or not you can actually control the thing that's stressing you out.
So, this leaves us with something to really think about. We tend to judge our coping mechanisms as either good or bad. But maybe this research suggests we should think more like a mechanic, choosing the right tool for the job. So the next time you're in a crisis, ask yourself, what's in your coping toolkit? And are you prepared to use the right tool for the right situation?